The air in the grand foyer felt thin and cold, a stark contrast to the gentle warmth Sarah carried within her heart. It wasn't just the difference in temperature, it was the weight of expectation, the silent judgment hanging heavy in the opulent space. Her worn dress felt coarse against her skin, a humiliating flag of her poverty amidst the polished marble and glinting gold. This moment, meeting the woman who held the key to David's world, was meant to be a celebration of their impossible love, yet it felt like walking into a carefully laid trap. A sense of dread, sharp and cold, pierced through her hope. Could love truly conquer all, or would the icy reality of their different worlds shatter the fragile peace they had found? This isn't just a story about star-crossed lovers. It's a battle for dignity against the suffocating power of prejudice. Prepare to witness a spirit tested, a heart pushed to its limits, and the quiet strength that can emerge from the deepest shadows. If you believe that courage can shine brightest when the odds are stacked against you, give this video a like and subscribe to join us on this journey where justice fights to prevail. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as David led her into the drawing room, the scent of expensive perfume and old money filling the air. He was everything she wasn't: confident, privileged, effortlessly charming. Yet beneath the veneer of wealth, he possessed a kindness that had captivated her completely. They had found solace in each other, a quiet harbor away from the storms of their vastly different lives. His world was one of sprawling estates and hushed servants, hers of cramped rooms above a bustling market and the constant ache of scarcity. Despite the chasm between them, their bond was undeniable, forged in shared laughter and a deep, mutual respect that transcended class. David adored Sarah, not for her background, but for the genuine warmth in her smile and the unwavering goodness in her soul. He saw past the threadbare clothes to the vibrant, compassionate woman beneath, and she saw past his fortune to the gentle, loving man who simply wanted to be understood. But waiting for them was David's mother, Elara Vance. She sat regally in a velvet chair, her posture impeccable, her expression a mask of cool indifference. Her eyes, the color of glacier ice, swept over Sarah, lingering for a moment on her simple attire, and a subtle, almost imperceptible tightening of the lips spoke volumes. Elara Vance was a woman accustomed to getting her way, her influence reaching into every corner of society. She controlled businesses, people, and she fully believed the destiny of her only son. The very notion of David, the heir to the Vance legacy, being entangled with a girl from the market was not just undesirable. It was an affront to her carefully constructed world. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken disdain. Sarah felt the weight of Elara's disapproval like a physical blow. David, sensing the shift, tightened his grip on Sarah's hand, offering silent reassurance. But even his presence could not fully shield her from the cold front that had just arrived. Elara finally spoke, her voice smooth but carrying an unsettling edge, like silk wrapped around steel.
David, darling, you've brought a guest?
There was no warmth in the word, only a chilling formality that stripped Sarah of her identity, reducing her to a mere placeholder, an unwelcome intrusion. The conflict had not merely begun. It had arrived with the force of a winter storm. A coolness settled in the grand rooms, a subtle shift in the air whenever David's mother, Eleanor, entered. It wasn't a dramatic clash of wills, not at first, but something far more insidious, like a slow poison administered in small, elegant doses. Sarah began to notice it at a seemingly casual afternoon tea among David's family friends. The conversation would be lively. Then Eleanor would gently steer it towards shared memories Sarah couldn't possibly know. Inside jokes, delivered with a knowing glance around the room that deliberately excluded the newcomer. It felt like a delicate silken cord tightening, pulling everyone else into a tight knot while leaving Sarah just outside the circle, the laughter echoing faintly as if from another room entirely. Eleanor's methods were sophisticated, never overtly rude, always couched in the language of polite concern or shared history. She might ask about Sarah's family, then sigh softly, remarking how different their worlds must be.
Oh, darling, you're so sweet. But do you really understand how things work here?
The words were soft, but they landed with the weight of stone, implying Sarah was naive, out of her depth, fundamentally unsuitable. She'd discuss upcoming family events, not mentioning them to Sarah until others brought them up, forcing Sarah to ask, always feeling slightly awkward and unwelcome. The sting was in the casualness of it, the way Eleanor made it seem so natural, so unintentional. Sarah felt the isolation keenly. At dinners, Eleanor would position herself to interrupt conversations Sarah was having with others, diverting attention with a seemingly urgent question for David or a family anecdote. The warm glow of the room seemed to dim, the rich scent of the food suddenly less appealing as a lump formed in Sarah's throat. She'd catch Eleanor's eye sometimes, a fleeting, almost imperceptible look of cool assessment, utterly devoid of warmth. It was a look that said, "I see you, and you don't belong." The hurt began as a persistent ache behind her ribs, a bruise on her spirit that never quite healed. She saw the comfortable ease with which others interacted with Eleanor, the deep bonds of shared history, and she felt like an alien presence. It was 1,000 tiny cuts, none deep enough to demand immediate attention, but together they bled her emotionally. Yet when she looked at David, saw the love in his eyes, the genuine happiness he found in her presence, she found the strength to swallow the pain. For him, she could endure the chilling shadow his mother cast. For him, she would try to navigate this increasingly hostile landscape, hoping that love could somehow conquer the cold. Calculated exclusion that was becoming her new reality. The air in town seemed to grow colder, the kind of chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Sarah felt eyes on her, heard the sudden quieting of conversations as she passed. A heavy knot tightened in her stomach. The friendly smiles that used to greet her had thinned, replaced by polite, distant nods or outright avoidance. Whispers slithered through the small community like unseen snakes, carrying venomous suggestions. It wasn't long before the source became clear, a bitter perfume, announcing the approach of David's mother. The mother moved through social circles with practiced ease, a sharp glint in her eyes. She didn't accuse directly, not at first. Instead, she planted seeds of doubt, questions wrapped in feigned concern. To Mrs. Gable at the market, she'd sigh and say, "Poor David, so smitten. I just worry Sarah might have expectations. Our family has a certain standing. You see?"
Sarah's such a sweet girl, but one does wonder about her background, doesn't one? She seems rather ambitious, given where she came from.
The seeds took root in fertile ground, nurtured by gossip and envy. The whispers grew louder, bolder. They reached Sarah's ears, sharp shards of ice piercing her heart. They spoke of her as a social climber, a fortune hunter, someone using David for his family's comfort. A suffocating blanket of isolation began to settle over her. Her hands would tremble sometimes, as she tried to focus on simple tasks, her appetite dwindling with each passing day. The vibrant light that usually shone in her eyes began to dim. David was not immune to the storm his mother was brewing. He saw the way people looked at Sarah, the subtle shifts in conversations when he was near. His mother pressed him relentlessly, her voice a constant dripping tap of disapproval.
David, darling, you know I only want what's best for you. Sarah is unsuitable. She simply doesn't understand our world. There are so many lovely girls from good families who would make a proper match. Have you considered dating Eleanor Ainsworth? Her mother mentioned she's home from finishing school.
She'd leave brochures for mixers, subtly hint about family legacies and the right sort of person. He felt torn, his loyalty to Sarah a shield against his mother's words, yet the weight of her expectations and the relentless pressure gnawed at him. He loved Sarah, her kindness, her genuine spirit, the way she made him feel alive in a way his structured world often didn't. But his mother's influence was a lifetime's habit, deeply ingrained. He'd leave meetings with her feeling heavy, burdened by a conflict he desperately wished would disappear. He found himself looking at Sarah sometimes, a flicker of doubt, placed there by his mother, clouding his gaze. A flicker he immediately hated himself for. The toll on Sarah was visible, the light leaving her eyes, the haunted look she carried. It was a suffocating web, trapping them both, woven thread by a mother's insidious campaign. The air in the conservatory felt unnaturally still, thick with the scent of damp earth and fading blossoms, a stark contrast to the storm gathering indoors. Sarah had arrived, expecting a quiet afternoon, perhaps tea with David, a brief, polite exchange with his mother. She had brought a small bouquet of simple garden roses, their scent sweet and hopeful. But the moment she stepped through the threshold, she felt a coldness settle over her, distinct from the cool stone floor beneath her feet. David was there, his face etched with a tension she had never seen. And his mother stood nearby, a figure of poised, chilling composure, a faint, knowing smile playing on her lips. The mother began not with pleasantries, but with a carefully constructed tale, woven with just enough plausible detail to ensnare the unsuspecting. She spoke of overheard conversations, of supposed inquiries Sarah had made, whispers hinting at ambitions far removed from genuine affection for David. It wasn't about a large sum of money directly, but the implication was clear. Sarah, burdened by her own past and lacking resources, was looking for security, perhaps even a better match she was still discreetly pursuing. The mother painted a picture of a woman calculating and disloyal, using David as a stepping stone or a temporary distraction. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, designed to pierce David's carefully guarded trust. David turned to Sarah, his eyes searching, clouded with confusion and hurt. The casual warmth that usually shone there was gone, replaced by a desperate need for explanation, tinged with the first cruel hint of suspicion. He held a folded paper in his hand, something the mother had clearly shown him. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her skin feeling tight and cold. This was the moment the earth shifted, the foundation of their connection suddenly unstable.
David, what is this? You can't possibly believe.
Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, laced with raw disbelief and pain. The accusation, delivered through his mother's venomous words, felt like a physical blow. The mother stepped forward, her presence imposing, her gaze like ice.
Truth has a way of revealing itself, dear. I only want what's best for my son. One must be so careful with intentions.
Her tone dripped with false concern, yet beneath it lay a cruel satisfaction. She watched Sarah's distress with an almost clinical interest, a predator observing its cornered prey. David looked from his mother to Sarah, the internal struggle visible on his face. He wanted to dismiss it, to hold Sarah's hand and laugh at the absurdity. But the mother's narrative, coupled with whatever fabricated evidence she had presented, had found a crack in his trust. A place where doubt could take root. The air crackled with unspoken accusations, with the weight of betrayal that hadn't occurred. A terrible silence fell between them, thick and suffocating. In that silence, a chasm opened, wide and deep. It wasn't just words that had been spoken. It was a wedge driven with brutal precision between two hearts that had just begun to find solace in each other. The scent of the wilting roses seemed to mock Sarah's failed hope, replaced by the bitter tang of despair. The tangible rift had formed. The grand house, usually filled with the scent of polished wood and aged paper, suddenly felt cold, a chill that sank deeper than the air could explain. Sarah had been called to the study, a room she usually found imposing but never menacing. Today, the atmosphere crackled with an unseen tension. She noticed the way the mother's eyes, usually sharp, seemed to hold a glint of something brittle and calculating. A single object lay on the vast mahogany desk under the harsh glare of a desk lamp, a small, intricately carved ivory box, one Sarah had seen in the mother's sitting room. The mother didn't offer a seat. She stood by the desk, her posture rigid, radiating an icy calm that was far more terrifying than anger. The air grew thick, stifling, carrying the heavy perfume the mother always wore, now smelling cloying and false. Sarah's stomach tightened, a knot of apprehension forming as she watched the older woman's carefully expressionless face. This was not a casual chat. This was an execution, carried out with chilling precision. Sarah felt suddenly small, exposed under that unwavering gaze. The mother gestured towards the box, her hand perfectly steady.
Do you recognize this, Sarah?
Her voice was low, devoid of warmth, cutting through the silence like a shard of glass. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She nodded slowly, her throat suddenly dry. The mother picked up the box, turning it over in her hands as if admiring its craftsmanship. But her eyes never left Sarah's face. The scent of the expensive wood seemed to fill the room, mixing with the cloying perfume. Then the accusation came, delivered with surgical precision.
It was in my room this morning. Now, it wasn't, until security found it in your bag.
The words landed like blows, each one designed to strip away Sarah's defense, her reputation, everything she had built. Sarah gasped, stepping back as if physically struck. Found in her bag? It was impossible. She hadn't touched the box, hadn't been near the mother's room all day. The room seemed to spin, the solid walls blurring into a hazy nightmare. The mother's gaze remained fixed, triumph glittering in her eyes.
A curious place for it to end up, wouldn't you agree? Especially with the valuables missing from inside.
Sarah's voice was a shaky whisper, laced with disbelief and terror.
No, that's not true. I didn't take anything. I didn't touch it.
Tears sprang to her eyes, blurring the cruel smile that began to play on the mother's lips. The injustice of it was crushing, a physical weight pressing down on her chest. She saw the trap now, sprung with devastating effectiveness. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated, malicious, and utterly heartbreaking. The coldness of the room intensified, wrapping around her like a shroud. The scent of the mother's perfume felt suffocating. She was caught, framed, her character attacked in the most public and humiliating way possible. And the woman who should have offered her protection was the architect of her ruin. The world she thought she was building with David felt like it was crumbling into dust around her. The air still vibrated with the echo of the words spoken, a cruel resonance that settled deep in Sarah's chest. Her mother's act, a swift, decisive severing born of cold calculation, had ripped the world she knew apart in a single brutal motion. The silence that followed was deafening, a void where David's presence had been just moments before. She stood amidst the ruins of what felt like her entire future, a visceral shock rendering her limbs heavy and unresponsive. A wave of intense pain washed over her, sharp and suffocating, stealing her breath. It wasn't just emotional. It was a physical ache, a hollowness spreading from her heart to her fingertips. Her mind reeled, a chaotic storm of questions for which there were no answers. Why? How could she? The confusion was a thick fog, obscuring reason, leaving her lost and disoriented in the sudden, terrifying darkness. She felt utterly helpless, a pawn moved and discarded in a game she hadn't known she was playing, powerless to undo the damage, unable to reach out or pull back what had been stolen. The vibrant tapestry of her dreams, woven with shared laughter, whispered promises, and a future built alongside David, lay shredded at her feet. Each thread represented a memory, a hope, a plan: the small cottage by the sea, the quiet evenings curled up together, the simple certainty of their tomorrow. Now they were just worthless scraps, fluttering away in the harsh wind of reality. The sweet scent of possibility that had perfumed her life was replaced by the acrid smell of ash and decay. She looked around the once familiar space, seeing it through new, tear-blurred eyes. It was no longer a sanctuary, but a graveyard of intentions, a monument to a love violently ended. Everything felt sharp and dangerous, like walking barefoot over broken glass. There was nothing left but the wreckage, the splintered framework of a life annihilated. The warmth that David had brought, the light that had guided her steps, was extinguished, leaving her alone in the chilling, desolate aftermath, the weight of her broken world pressing down, crushing her spirit beneath its unbearable burden. The biting air clawed at Sarah's exposed skin, a constant reminder that the thin walls and missing panes offered no real protection. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of light filtering through cracks, illuminating the bleak emptiness of the space she now occupied, a forgotten storage room in a building long since abandoned. The echoes of the recent past still screamed in her mind, the public spectacle, the ruin, the sudden, complete silence after her mother vanished. It felt like a physical blow, leaving her breathless and aching. She was alone, utterly and terrifyingly alone, with nothing but the threadbare clothes on her back, and a name now synonymous with scandal and betrayal. Hunger was a dull, persistent throb in her belly, a counterpoint to the sharper pain of despair that lodged in her chest. Her reputation, once her shield and strength, was now a heavy chain dragging her down. Every door she timidly approached, every plea for a day's work, was met with averted gazes or cruel, knowing smiles. The whispers followed her like a phantom limb, cold and cutting. She remembered the face of a woman she'd known her whole life, someone who'd once shared tea and laughter in warmer, happier days. Hope, fragile and foolish, had made her knock. The door opened just a crack.
You, get away from here. We want nothing to do with your kind. Don't you know the shame you've brought?
The words were ice. The door slamming shut, a physical rejection that mirrored the world's condemnation. It wasn't just her mother's actions that had stripped everything away. It was the swift, brutal judgment of a society eager to cast her out, alongside the woman who had failed them all. Days blurred into a cycle of gnawing hunger, shivering nights, and the constant search for any small thing that might offer sustenance or shelter. She scavenged through refuse bins, the stench of decay, a heavy blanket in the damp air. The feel of discarded food in her hands was a profound humiliation, a stark measure of how far she had fallen. Her feet ached from endless walking. Her body grew weaker, and the vibrant spirit she once possessed felt like a distant, impossible memory. Despair was a vast, black ocean threatening to swallow her whole. Each sunrise brought not hope, but simply another day to survive the unsurvivable. Yet, amidst the crushing weight of her situation, a tiny, stubborn ember of defiance flickered within. She was brought low, stripped bare, but she was still breathing. And as the cold settled around her again, a silent, fierce resolve hardened in her eyes. She would not break. She would endure. The chill seeped into Sarah's bones, a physical manifestation of the emptiness that had hollowed her out. She sat huddled on the worn rug, the rough fibers scratching against her skin, grounding her in a reality that felt utterly alien. The room was dark, save for a sliver of gray light pushing past the edge of the thick curtains, illuminating dust motes dancing in the heavy air. Each breath felt shallow, insufficient, as if her lungs were refusing to engage with a world that had become too painful to bear. This was the bottom, the place where the fall ended, not with a crash, but with a sickening final thud. Memories, sharp and cruel, pricked at the edges of her consciousness. The dismissive glances, the whispered lies that had grown into shouts, the calculated moves that had stripped away everything she had built. It wasn't just the loss of tangible things. It was the theft of her reputation, the crushing weight of injustice pressing down on her chest until she could barely gasp. It felt fundamentally wrong, an affront to everything she believed in. Why? Why had the world conspired against her? Why had her efforts, her integrity, counted for nothing against the tide of malice and indifference? The bitter taste of despair coated her tongue. Her gaze fell on her hands, clenched tightly in her lap, the knuckles white. These hands had worked tirelessly, had built dreams, had offered help, and yet they were now empty, trembling with a mix of exhaustion and impotent rage. Was this all that remained? A shell devoid of purpose? The hopelessness was a suffocating blanket, heavier than any physical weight. The future stretched before her, a long, dark tunnel with no visible light. The thought of finding her way out felt not just difficult, but impossible. The energy required, the sheer will to face another day, seemed utterly beyond her reach. Can you ever recover from something that changes the very core of who you are? When the foundations are shattered, can they ever be rebuilt? The questions echoed in the vast, empty space within her mind, each one a hammer blow against the fragile remnants of her spirit. The unfairness of it all burned hotter than any fire. To be brought so low, not by a single misstep, but by the deliberate cruelty and calculated indifference of others. Was there truly no justice in the world? Was she simply meant to wither away here, at the nadir? A casualty of a battle she hadn't even realized she was fighting until it was too late? The silence in the room seemed to mock her, confirming her isolation. This was the absolute lowest point, where the possibility of rising again felt like a cruel, impossible fantasy. The world outside her window was a blur of indifferent gray, matching the landscape of her soul. Days bled into nights in the quiet, suffocating room, each moment heavy with the weight of what she had lost, of what had been taken. The air tasted stale, thick with the dust of neglect, and the only sounds were the hollow echoes of her own breathing and the distant hum of a life moving on without her. Pain, sharp and relentless at first, had dulled into a persistent, gnawing ache, a constant reminder of her defeat. She had allowed herself to sink, to be consumed by the unfairness, the betrayal, the crushing weight of the world's indifference. Her limbs felt heavy, bound by an invisible chain of despair, and even the simple act of opening her eyes felt like an insurmountable task. But in the deepest, darkest corner of her being, beneath layers of hurt and numbness, a tiny ember flickered. It was faint, easily missed, a fragile thing fighting against the suffocating ash. It wasn't a surge of anger, not yet. It was something quieter, more fundamental. The subtle tremor ran through her, a feeling alien to the inertia that held her captive. A memory surfaced, unbidden, not of the pain inflicted, but of a simple moment of quiet strength she had once possessed long before the storm. The ember caught a tiny draft, growing infinitesimally brighter. A thought formed, slow and laborious, pushing back against the fog. Is this it? Is this my end? The answer that resonated from that deep place was a resounding, quiet no. She wouldn't be defined by the cruelty of others. She wouldn't let their actions be the final chapter of her story. This wasn't about proving them wrong anymore, not truly. That desire had felt hollow. This was about proving something to herself, a quiet, fierce rebellion against the narrative of defeat. A wave of unexpected energy, small but potent, coursed through her veins, chasing away some of the leaden fatigue. She pushed herself up, the movement stiff and uncomfortable, but deliberate, her eyes still weary, fixed on a point in the distance, a horizon she hadn't dared to look towards in weeks. The decision settled within her, firming the fragile spark into a steady flame. She would rebuild. Not for validation, not for revenge, not for anyone else's approval or regret. She would do it for the woman she knew she could be, for the life that was still hers to claim. The path ahead was daunting, strewn with the debris of shattered hopes. But for the first time in a long time, she saw a path at all. This was not the end. It was merely the difficult, crucial beginning. The world had stripped Sarah bare. The comfortable life, the familiar walls, the easy assumptions, all gone, swept away by the tide of her mother's undoing. She found herself adrift in a harsh reality she had only ever seen from a distance, a place defined by the gnawing ache in her stomach and the perpetual chill that seeped into her bones, even indoors. Her new home was a single cramped room above a noisy alley, smelling faintly of mildew and stale cooking oil. The rough, finding work was an exercise in quiet humiliation. Every application was met with polite refusals or outright suspicion. The family name, once a source of pride, was now a scarlet letter. she could feel the eyes on her in the street, hear the hushed whispers that followed her like a shadow.
Isn't that one of them?
A cold shiver would trace its way down her spine. The world felt smaller, colder, judging her for sins that were not her own, yet stained her just the same. Poverty was a relentless foe. Hunger was a constant companion, a dull, persistent throb behind her ribs. Meals were often just the cheapest bread or thin, watery soup that offered little nourishment. Her hands, once soft, grew calloused and rough from the menial labor she finally managed to secure. Scrubbing floors, hauling deliveries, anything that paid a pittance. Her muscles protested, aching with an unfamiliar fatigue that went deeper than mere tiredness. It was the weariness of sheer survival. Despair lurked in the corners of her small room, a dark entity waiting to swallow her whole. There were nights she lay awake, tears silently tracking paths through the grime on her face, wondering if it was worth the struggle. But somewhere deep inside, a spark refused to be extinguished. It was a stubborn, defiant flicker, fueled by the injustice of her situation and a fierce determination to build something, anything, that was hers, untainted by the past. Slowly, painstakingly, she began to find her footing. The exhaustion was a constant companion, but the rhythm of hard physical work brought a strange, raw satisfaction. Each floor scrubbed clean, each heavy box moved, was a small act of defiance against the forces trying to keep her down. The smell of sweat and honest labor became more welcome than the perfumed air of her former life. One sweltering afternoon, after days of back-breaking work, she managed to save enough for a simple but hot and filling meal. Not just bread, but stew with actual vegetables. The taste, rich and savory, was a revelation, a moment of pure, unadulterated pleasure that brought a lump to her throat. It was a tiny victory, insignificant to the world, but monumental to her. It was proof that she could endure, that she could climb, one aching step at a time. The mountain ahead was still daunting, shrouded in mist and uncertainty, but she had taken the first steps, and the fire in her spirit, though flickering, burned on. The stale air in the small rented room felt thin, but it was hers, and for the first time in a long time, that felt like breathing. Sarah looked at her hands, rough from years of unspoken burdens. The past had tried to crush her spirit, but the pressure had instead revealed something resilient, something sharp, like a diamond formed under unimaginable stress. She had faced the darkness and walked through it, and now she needed to build, not just a new life, but her life, shaped by her hands. Poverty had been a constant companion, but it had also taught her resourcefulness. She remembered the small, intricate carvings her grandfather used to make, the way he could transform a simple block of wood into something beautiful with just a few tools. It had been a quiet fascination then, something she'd only dabbled in when no one was watching. Now, driven by necessity and a flicker of inspiration, she revisited that forgotten skill. The smell of sawdust became her new perfume, the rhythmic scrape of the chisel, her soundtrack. Her fingers, once clumsy, grew nimble, guided by an instinct she hadn't known she possessed. She started small, crafting simple birds and animals, selling them at a local market. The sight of someone admiring her work, holding it gently, felt like a validation the world had long denied her. The weight in her pocket, the small coins earned through sheer effort, was heavier than any fortune given freely. As her skill grew, so did her confidence. She branched out, tackling more complex designs, learning to incorporate different woods and finishes. Each finished piece was a small victory, a testament to her newfound ability to create beauty and value from nothing. The physical act of shaping the wood mirrored the shaping of her own life. She was no longer a victim of circumstance. She was an artisan of her destiny. The isolation she had once felt began to lift. The market wasn't just a place to sell, it was a community. People saw not just her carvings, but her quiet determination, her steady hands. The light returning to her eyes, she learned to talk about her work, to share the stories behind the wood. Her voice, once hesitant, gained strength. Each coin earned, each piece sold, chipped away at the walls that had enclosed her. She could afford better tools, better materials, and eventually, a slightly larger room with a window that let in more light. Her physical surroundings improved, reflecting the expansion happening within her soul. She stood taller, walked with more purpose. The fear that had been a constant shadow began to recede, replaced by the quiet hum of self-reliance. She was forging her own path, piece by painstaking piece. And it was a path leading towards a future she was finally strong enough to claim. Years rolled by, each one a quiet affirmation of a life carved out of necessity and honed into purpose. The memory of gilded cages and cutting whispers faded, replaced by the steady rhythm of her own making. Sarah, the girl who had felt adrift in a world of unearned privilege, was now a woman of undeniable substance, her shoulders squared, not by inherited posture, but by the weight of honest work. Her hands, once tremulous in the face of scorn, were now steady, capable, finding satisfaction in the tangible results of her efforts. The air she breathed wasn't thick with the scent of old money and stagnant expectations, but clean and crisp, carrying the subtle, earthy fragrance of her chosen path. Perhaps the rich smell of soil, the clean scent of wood, or the sharp tang of creativity in a workshop. She had found a calling that demanded skill, dedication, and integrity, qualities the old world had devalued, but which were currency here. Success didn't arrive in a sudden, dramatic flourish, but accumulated like fine dust, settling into a solid, dependable foundation. Each small victory, each challenge overcome through sheer willpower and learned expertise, added another brick to the sturdy structure of her life. There was no inherited fortune, no influential surname opening doors, only the quiet click of a lock giving way to persistent effort, the warm glow of a lamp illuminating late-night study, the satisfying ache of muscles used in meaningful labor. She felt a profound sense of peace, a deep contentment that resonated not from external validation, but from within. The simple feel of worn fabric against her skin, the taste of a meal she had earned, the sound of quiet contentment in her own space. These were the luxuries she now cherished. She had built a refuge not of stone and glass, but of resilience and self-respect. The world of wealth and privilege, once a source of suffocating pain and longing, now felt distant, like a faded photograph. Its dramas no longer touched her tranquil shores. She stood strong, self-sufficient, a living testament to the power of forging one's own destiny, proving that the greatest fortune was the quiet, unwavering strength found within a capable soul. Her stability was her triumph, her fulfillment the sweet taste of justice served by life itself. News of her improbable rise began to filter back to the place where her past had been most painful. It traveled on the whispers of former neighbors, carried by the hesitant congratulations of distant relatives, finally landing on the ears of the mother and son who had cast her out. They heard about her innovative company, the accolades she received, the quiet, undeniable success she had built from the ashes of her despair. Their lives, however, had taken a different turn. The prosperity they had so readily displayed, the foundation they believed unbreakable, had begun to crumble. The son's ambitious, reckless schemes had collapsed, taking with them the family's dwindling savings. The mother's carefully curated world of appearances had frayed at the edges, revealing the strain of mounting debts and forced smiles. The scent of their former superiority had long faded, replaced by the stale odor of anxiety and decline. One crisp autumn afternoon, as she oversaw the final touches on a new branch office in a nearby city, circumstances, with a cruel twist of fate, brought them into proximity. She stepped out for a brief moment of fresh air, the city breeze cool on her face, the distant sound of traffic a dull roar. Across the busy street, near the entrance to a worn-down building, she saw them. The mother, her shoulders slumped, wore a coat that looked too thin for the weather, its fabric dull and pilled. The son beside her fidgeted, his face pale and drawn, his eyes darting nervously. There was a desperation in their posture she had never witnessed before. It was a stark contrast to the arrogant confidence they had once exuded. She felt a strange jolt, a knot forming in her stomach, not of fear, but of profound shock. They were talking to someone, their hands gesturing with pleading urgency. She couldn't hear their words over the city noise, but the body language was unmistakable. They were begging for time, for mercy, for something they clearly lacked. The son ran a hand through his thinning hair, looking utterly defeated. The mother wrung her hands, her gaze fixed on the ground. Then the mother looked up. Her eyes, once sharp and contemptuous, were hollowed with worry. They swept across the street, scanning the faces of strangers. For a terrifying second, their gazes locked. Recognition flickered in the mother's eyes, followed instantly by a wave of something akin to shame or disbelief. The son followed her gaze, his jaw dropping slightly. They froze. The air seemed to thin around them, the bustling city suddenly quiet. She stood there, bathed in the afternoon light, poised and successful, while they stood in the shadow of their misfortunes. It wasn't triumph she felt, but a quiet, weighty understanding. The universe, it seemed, kept its own ledger. Their past cruelty now stood in stark relief against their present vulnerability, a silent echo across the street. The air in the familiar old cafe hung thick with the scent of coffee and stale pastries, a smell that once stirred a knot of anxiety deep in Sarah's stomach. Today, it simply was. She sat by the window, the weak afternoon sun warming her skin, a feeling of settled peace radiating from her. Life had tested her, broken her, and painstakingly put her back together into something resilient and true. She was no longer the trembling girl who cowered in the shadow of expectation and scorn. A gentle breeze stirred the leaves outside, whispering of change and growth. Then she saw her, near the counter, a figure frozen in disbelief. Her mother. Time had etched lines of discontent around her eyes, but the scent of her overly sweet perfume still reached Sarah, sharp and cloying. Shock rippled across the woman's face, quickly followed by a flicker of the old disapproval, a silent question of, "What are you doing here?" This was the crucible where the old Sarah had melted under pressure, but the new Sarah held her gaze calmly, a quiet strength emanating from her like warmth. The familiar feeling of being the underdog, facing an insurmountable power, simply didn't arrive. It was a phantom limb of the past. Her mother recovered, approaching the table with an enforced smile that didn't touch her eyes.
Sarah? Is that really you? Good heavens, you've changed!
The tone dripped with implied criticism, suggesting the change was not for the better.
Still wearing those plain things, I see. And you look tired. Life out there must be harder than you imagined, running away.
The old hooks were cast, designed to snag on insecurity, to reel her back into a spiral of self-doubt. The conflict had begun, a subtle, insidious escalation of the familiar power struggle. But Sarah didn't flinch. She met her mother's gaze levelly, a faint, genuine smile touching her lips. There was no anger, no fear, only a profound sense of being anchored. She had nothing to prove, nothing to defend. The urge for petty revenge, for a sharp retort, simply wasn't there. The turnaround was complete. Her victory was internal. "Hello, Mother," Sarah said, her voice steady and calm. "Yes, I've changed. Life out there showed me what I was capable of." Her mother's smile faltered. She seemed taken aback by the lack of reaction, the absence of the usual flustered apologies or defensive explanations. The air grew thick with unspoken expectations unmet. Sarah had effortlessly shifted the power dynamic, not by force, but by simply refusing to play the old game. She was a rock where her mother expected to find shifting sand. The revenge was in her serenity, the resurgence in her quiet self-possession. In that moment, sitting under the afternoon sun, Sarah understood the true nature of her triumph, not over her mother, but over the fear she once held within herself. It was a clear moral ending to that painful chapter. Freedom wasn't granted, it was built from within. Years later, the grand house felt hollow, its rooms echoing with a quiet discontent the gilded fixtures could no longer mask. The mother, her face etched with lines that weren't entirely from age, sat scrolling through a tablet, while her son idly watched a screen flickering with images of aspiration and success he increasingly felt were out of reach. Life hadn't unfolded as effortlessly as they had assumed it would. Connections frayed, opportunities dried up, and a pervasive sense of stagnation had settled over them like dust. Suddenly, the mother stopped scrolling, her breath catching. On the screen before her, radiant and confident, was Sarah. Not the timid, withdrawn girl they had known, but a woman commanding attention, speaking with articulate passion at a prestigious event. The headline below her image spoke of innovation, resilience, and groundbreaking achievement in a field Sarah had once only dreamed of entering. It was a punch to the gut, unexpected and sharp. The son looked up, his own restless gaze snagged by the familiar yet transformed face. Recognition dawned slowly, then hit with the force of a physical blow. They watched in silence as Sarah moved with an ease and grace that spoke of hard-won victory. The laughter they had directed at her awkwardness, the scorn they had heaped upon her aspirations, felt like distant, cruel echoes against the backdrop of her undeniable triumph. It wasn't just her success that struck them, but the person she had become, strong, poised, surrounded by respect and admiration. They saw the kindness in her eyes when she addressed someone, the genuine warmth in her smile, qualities they had tried to crush but had instead blossomed beautifully. A bitter taste filled the mother's mouth, not just of regret, but of a profound, sickening realization of what they had actively destroyed, and, perhaps more painfully, what they had irretrievably lost the chance to be a part of. They saw the vibrant life Sarah was living, a life rich, not just in accomplishment, but seemingly in genuine human connection and purpose, things that felt increasingly absent in their own sterile existence. The sun shifted uncomfortably.
That's her, Sarah.
His voice was low, disbelieving. The mother could only nod, her gaze fixed on the screen, a cold dread spreading through her. They had wanted to diminish her, to make themselves feel bigger by making her feel small. But all they had done was prune a branch that had grown back stronger, taller, casting a shadow that now highlighted their own stunted growth. The irony was a cruel, silent tormentor. Sarah's success wasn't their punishment. It was simply the undeniable proof of the valuable human spirit they had cast aside, a reminder of the emptiness their cruelty had ultimately created within themselves.
Look at her. She actually did it.
Her words were barely a whisper, laced with a venom that had lost its power, replaced by a hollow ache. They had broken something precious within themselves in their effort to break her. She sat by the window, the twilight air cool against her skin, carrying the faint scent of rain on dry earth. Sarah looked out, not seeing the familiar street, but the long, arduous path she had traveled. The journey had been steep, marked by falls and bruising blows to the soul. The memory of the raw, gaping wounds still brought a faint, phantom ache to her chest, a sharp pang that reminded her of the depth of the betrayal and loss she had endured. Yet, as she breathed in the clean air, a profound sense of peace settled over her. It wasn't the peace of forgetting, but the quiet strength that came from surviving. She had faced the storm, been stripped bare, and discovered an unyielding core within herself. Resilience, once a foreign concept, now felt like the very marrow of her bones. She had relied on no one but herself in the end, pulling herself up from the wreckage when others had turned away. And in that solitary struggle, she had found a self-reliance more sturdy than any external support. The material wealth she had once chased, the gilded cages she had yearned for, now seemed like ephemeral dust. Her perspective had shifted fundamentally. True wealth, she understood with a clarity that resonated deep within her spirit, was not measured in bank accounts or possessions. It was the integrity she had fought to maintain when pressured to compromise. It was the inner strength she had found when she thought she had none left. It was the quiet, unshakable self-worth forged in the fires of adversity. These were riches no one could steal, no market could crash, no betrayer could devalue. The emotional wounds, once so agonizingly open and vulnerable, had finally healed. They hadn't vanished without a trace. They remained, not as sources of pain, but as visible, tangible scars etched upon her spirit. These were not blemishes to be hidden, but symbols of her endurance, badges of courage earned in the brutal battle for her own soul. They were the permanent, quiet testaments to the strength she had discovered, the lessons she had learned, and the woman she had become. Each scar told a story of survival, a dramatic reminder that even in the face of utter ruin, a deeper, more profound kind of strength could rise. The sunlight, warm and golden, spilled across the worn wood of the table where Sarah sat, a ceramic mug cupped in her hands. The aroma of herbal tea mingled with the scent of damp earth drifting in from the small garden just beyond the open window. Here, amidst the quiet hum of nature and the gentle rustle of leaves, Sarah found a peace that felt deeper than any material possession. Her hands, once accustomed to the harsh reality of struggle, now found comfort in simple tasks. Tending to the soil, mending a tear, shaping clay on a small potter's wheel in the corner. Her eyes, reflecting the soft light, held a quiet wisdom, a depth that had been forged in the crucible of adversity. She remembered the biting cold of loneliness, the sharp sting of her mother's cruel words, the suffocating weight of expectations she could never meet. That world, a landscape of judgment and superficiality, felt impossibly distant now, a faded photograph compared to the vibrant life she had cultivated. Her mother, still chasing phantoms of status and wealth, could never comprehend this richness. She saw only the lack of marble floors, designer clothes, the absence of glittering parties. She measured success in square footage and bank balances, blind to the true treasures Sarah possessed: resilience, self-acceptance, and a profound connection to the quiet pulse of the world around her. Sarah's life was woven from threads of quiet moments, acts of simple kindness, the satisfaction of creating something with her own hands, and the freedom of being authentically herself. The battle had been long and arduous, fought not with fists or angry words, but with silent perseverance and an unwavering belief in her own worth, separate from her circumstances or others' opinions. The scars remained, faint lines on her soul, but they were no longer sources of pain, but rather testaments to strength. Now, looking out at the vibrant green of her garden, listening to the cheerful chatter of sparrows in the eaves, a profound sense of contentment settled over her. She had not just survived, she had bloomed. She had found her true home, not in a grand house or a bustling city, but within the quiet sanctuary of her own heart. The external validation she had once craved held no power over her now. She was whole, complete, and utterly at peace in her own world. The journey had demanded everything from her: tears shed in silent rooms, courage summoned in the face of despair, a relentless refusal to be defined by the limitations others imposed. Yet, standing on the other side of the storm, the clarity she possessed was absolute. The true measure of a life was not found in accumulation, but in resilience. Not in external acclaim, but in internal fortitude. She had walked through fire and emerged not unscathed, but strengthened, refined. The world had tried to break her, to tell her she was less because she lacked what others possessed. But in the quiet solitude of her own making, she had discovered the immeasurable value of her spirit, unbreakable and free. This quiet triumph, this profound inner peace, was a victory no external force could ever diminish. It was a life lived on her own terms, a testament to the quiet power of finding happiness within oneself, far away from the clamor of the world and its fleeting, empty promises.